Rachel Okocha had always known what it meant to struggle. At just 23, she had already seen more hardship than most people twice her age. She had once lived a normal life, with a father who used to call her "my little sunshine," and a mother who braided her hair every Saturday morning. But everything changed when she was in secondary school. First, her father died after a brief illness. Then, less than a year later, her mother followed. It was sudden, painful, and left Rachel completely alone. She had no siblings, no uncles or aunties willing to help. She was just a teenager, scared and grieving, but there was no time to cry for too long. School became a dream she could no longer afford. She dropped out and started doing anything she could find, cleaning homes, selling sachet water, helping old women in markets, anything to survive. Now, 5 years later, she lived in a tiny one-room apartment. The room was small enough that when she stretched her arms, she could almost touch both walls. There was a mattress on the floor, a wooden table with a missing leg, and a plastic bucket she used to store water. It wasn't much, but it was hers. She had just gotten a new job as a cleaner in a big office building. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was little, but Rachel was thankful. After months of walking the streets, knocking on doors, and getting turned away again and again, this was a chance to breathe, a chance to survive. That morning, as the rain poured heavily outside, Rachel stood in front of a small cracked mirror. She adjusted her old but neat blouse and tied her hair into a simple ponytail. Her shoes were worn, and her umbrella had holes, but she was determined not to be late. She took one last look around her little room, picked up her bag, and stepped out into the cold, rainy morning. As she walked through puddles, trying to shield herself with the torn umbrella, she whispered to herself, "Just hold on, Rachel. Things will get better." And in that moment, she didn't know how right she was. The rain had gotten heavier by the time Rachel reached the front gate of Williams Ground, a tall, glass-walled building that touched the sky. She had only seen it from afar before. Now, it was where she would work. Her heart beat fast with a mix of nerves and hope. She held her bag tighter and kept her head down, stepping carefully to avoid the large puddles forming along the roadside. Cars splashed past. People hurried by with umbrellas, barely glancing at anyone else. Then, just a few steps away from the gate, Rachel slowed down. There, sitting on a low concrete block by the side of the road, was a young man. His clothes were soaked. His shirt clung to his frame, and he didn't even have shoes on. His hair was messy and his face looked pale from the cold. He had no umbrella, no jacket, just a thin stick resting beside him. The man looked cold and alone, water dripping from his head to the ground. Rachel paused. People walked past him like he didn't exist. Some looked at him in disgust, others in pity, but no one stopped. She felt her heart twist. Just as she was about to go over to him, something unexpected happened. A boy, no more than 16, walked quickly past the man, then doubled back in a flash. Rachel watched in shock as the boy snatched something from the man's side, his wallet, and ran. He stood up, confused, and that's when Rachel noticed him reach for the stick and slide a pair of dark glasses onto his face. That's when she understood he was blind. Rachel didn't think twice. "Hey!" she shouted, and without a second thought she dashed after the thief. Her slippers splashed through muddy water. The boy was fast, weaving between people, but Rachel was determined. She chased him down the sidewalk, breathing hard, heart pounding, feet slipping. At the corner of the street, the boy tried to scale a small fence, but Rachel grabbed the back of his shirt. "Give it back!" she shouted. The boy hissed at her and tried to shake her off, but Rachel held tight. She pulled the boy down. The boy dropped the wallet and ran, disappearing into the rainy crowd. Rachel picked up the wet, worn-out wallet and turned around, panting. Her clothes were soaked, but she didn't care. She hurried back to the blind man who was still standing in confusion. "Sir," she said gently, placing a hand on his arm. "It's okay. I got it back." He turned his head slightly toward her voice. His face was calm but tired. "You ran after him?" he asked, his voice deep but soft. "Yes," Rachel replied, pressing the wallet into his hand. "Here it is. You're safe now." The man held the wallet tightly. He turned his face slightly up toward the sky as if listening to the sound of her voice. "Thank you." he said quietly. Thank you so much. You didn't have to do that. Rachel shook her head. I couldn't just stand there and watch. For a moment they stood in silence. The rain continued to fall, soaking them both, but Rachel didn't move. The man's hands trembled slightly as he held the wallet close to his chest. Rachel glanced at him again. His clothes were old, but there was something odd, something that didn't fit. On his wrist, just under the soaked sleeve, was a watch. Not just any watch. It was silver and shiny, with what looked like tiny diamonds around the edges. Rachel had seen something like it once in a magazine. It cost more than her rent for a whole year. She laughed gently. She was probably imagining things. There was no way the watch was real. What's your name? He asked gently. The man's voice pulled her out of her silent thoughts. Rachel, she replied. He gave a small nod. I'm Derek. Thank you, Rachel. Not many people would do what you just did. Rachel gave him a small smile. It's okay. You shouldn't be out here like this. You'll catch a cold. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there quietly, the rain still falling around them. Rachel looked at her watch. She was going to be late. She looked at the man standing in the rain, soaked, shivering, blind and helpless, and something inside her refused to walk away. She bit her lower lip and glanced at the big glass doors of the Williams ground. She was already late. If she stood there any longer, she could lose the job she had prayed so hard to get. But how could she leave him like this? Without thinking much, she removed her old, leaking umbrella and held it over his head. The rain kept hitting her back, but she didn't care. Here, she said softly. You need it more than I do. Derek turned his face toward her voice again. But what about you? He asked gently. Rachel gave a small, wet laugh. I'm used to getting wet. She stared at him for a second. Something about him made her hesitate. He didn't act like most homeless people. There was calmness in his voice, strength in his stillness. She looked at the umbrella in his hand, then at the street around them. Still, no one was stopping. No one was helping. Her heart ached. You should go home, she said softly. You can't stand here like this. Derek stayed silent. Rachel reached into her bag and pulled out the only money she had for the day. It was meant for her lunch and transport back home, but she didn't care. Here, she said, placing the wet notes gently into his hand. Buy something hot to eat, and take a cab home. It will be safer. Derek's hand closed around the money, but then he opened it again and held the notes back out to her. I can't take what you need to survive, he said quietly. Rachel stared at him. The rain was running down her forehead, into her eyes, but she didn't blink. I'm okay, she said, trying to smile. You need it more than I do. But Derek shook his head again. You've already done enough. Rachel hesitated. Her eyes flicked to the large clock at the top of the building. She sighed and made a sudden decision. All right then, she said. You're coming with me. Derek tilted his head, confused. To where? My work, she said quickly. I don't know where else to take you, but I can't leave you here. She reached for his arm gently and guided him as they crossed the street. People looked at them strangely, some with pity, some with judgment. But Rachel didn't stop. She walked through the glass doors of the building, her wet shoes squeaking on the floor. She greeted the security guard quickly and headed straight to the janitor's section. There, she found a small, empty corner near the back, where cleaning supplies were usually kept. It wasn't warm, it wasn't nice, but it was dry. Just stay here for a while, she said, helping him sit on a small bench. I'll be nearby. I need to start my cleaning before they fire me. Derek didn't argue. He sat down quietly, resting his stick beside him. Rachel pulled a towel from her cart and handed it to him. Here, dry off a bit. He accepted it with a quiet nod. Thank you, Rachel, he said softly. She smiled, though he couldn't see it. No problem, she whispered. Then she grabbed her mop and bucket and hurried off to start her work. Her clothes still wet, her stomach empty, but her heart strangely full. She moved quietly from one corner of the building to another, her mop sliding across the shiny floor. The smell of floor cleaner mixed with the scent of perfume from the office girls who walked past her without a glance.
She had finished wiping down the ground floor and was now heading to the upper corridor. Her clothes were still damp and her feet ached, but her mind kept drifting to the young man sitting quietly in the storage corner downstairs. Derek. Was he cold? Was he hungry? She hadn't eaten, but somehow she didn't feel it. She just wanted to get something warm for him. Maybe she could sneak out quickly after mopping the next hallway. But then she noticed something strange. There was a buzz in the air, a different kind of energy. The staff were talking more than usual, whispers, excited voices, and quick footsteps.
Rachel slowed down a little and listened. They said he just returned. Are you serious? I thought he was still in London. No, he's back. The real boss himself. I've always wanted to see him. I'm so happy he is coming here. Rachel frowned and leaned closer to the door of a nearby office. The girls inside were giggling. I heard he's really young and so handsome. Not just handsome, smart, extremely rich and single. One of them squealed. Rachel shook her head gently and kept mopping. She didn't have time for gossip. But just then, Clara, the supervisor, walked past with her usual loud high heels and even louder confidence. Her perfume filled the hallway seconds before she appeared. Clara walked like the floor belonged to her. Her hips swayed, her makeup was perfect, and her eyes scanned everything like a queen inspecting her kingdom. She paused to fix her hair near the glass wall, then smiled to herself and said loudly, "Well, I'll be the first one he sees, and trust me, once he sees me, game over." The girls around her laughed and nodded. They couldn't argue with Clara, who was from a rich family and graduated from a prestigious university. Rachel sighed quietly. She had heard of the CEO, of course. Everyone had. He was the owner of Williams Ground, a company that had grown big so fast people called it magic. They said the CEO built it with his own hands from scratch and was already a billionaire before turning 30. But no one in the local office had ever seen him. He'd been abroad for a long time. Now that he had returned, everyone wanted a piece of him. Rachel leaned on her mop for a second. Handsome, rich, powerful, she murmured under her breath. Sounds like a movie. But she didn't smile. She didn't have time to daydream. She looked at the clock on the wall. Her break was near. Her eyes widened. Derek. He was still downstairs, alone, possibly cold, and definitely hungry. She quickly rinsed her mop, put it back in the cart, and wheeled it down the hallway. The gossip about the CEO could wait. Someone was waiting for food and kindness. The hours passed slowly as Rachel cleaned one floor after another. Her back hurt, her arms were tired, but her mind stayed on one thing: Derek. She had promised herself that once her break came, she would get them both something to eat. When her shift finally paused, she took a deep breath, wiped her forehead with the edge of her sleeve, and hurried toward the side exit. She clutched the small money left in her pocket. It wasn't much, but it could buy 2 hot meat pies and a small bottle of water. That would be enough for now. As she turned the corner, her heart beat a little faster. She was already imagining Derek's smile when she returned with food. She was just pushing the door open when she heard a sharp, angry voice echo behind her. But she was in a hurry, so she didn't hear. "What is this filthy creature doing here?" Clara shouted, standing just a few steps away from where Derek had been sitting. Her perfectly done brows were raised high, and her lips were curled in disgust. She had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, like she couldn't bear to breathe the same air. Derek was still in the corner, seated quietly, his walking stick resting on his lap. His head was turned slightly, sensing the attention, but his face stayed calm. "I said," Clara repeated louder so others could hear, "who brought this dirty beggar into this building?" Some staff passing by glanced at them, then quickly looked away. A few paused at a distance, watching. One girl giggled nervously. Another whispered something to her friend and shook her head. But no one said anything. No one ever challenged Clara. "Look at you," Clara sneered, stepping closer to Derek. "Wet, smelly, barefoot. Sitting like this is a homeless shelter. Get out, now." Derek said nothing. He didn't move. Clara scoffed. "Don't you dare ignore me. Are you deaf too? This is a workplace, not a rubbish dump." Still, Derek stayed silent. Clara took another step and pointed toward the exit. I said leave, now, before I call security. There was a long pause. The air felt heavy. Then slowly Derek stood up. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He reached for his stick, picked it up gently, and turned toward the door. He walked past Clara, past the crowd, past the whispers. Dignified, silent. Clara rolled her eyes. Blind and useless. People like that shouldn't be allowed near places like this. A few of the staff chuckled uncomfortably. Few minutes later, Rachel didn't even realize she was walking fast until she pushed through the front door and stepped back into the building, dripping rainwater across the polished floor. Her eyes scanned the hallway. Derek was gone. She rushed to the corner where she had left him, but it was empty. The towel she had given him was folded neatly on the bench. Her heart dropped. Then she saw him. He was standing just outside the main gate, the rain pouring over his shoulders again. He held his stick quietly, his head slightly bowed. Rachel's heart burned. She stormed outside, rain slapping her face, but she didn't care. "Derek," she called. He turned slightly at the sound of her voice. Rachel ran to him and placed her hand on his arm. "What happened? Why did you leave?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said softly, "She asked me to go," loudly. Rachel turned sharply. "Clara." She was walking back through the hallway with a cup of coffee in her hand, smiling to herself. The moment Rachel saw her, something inside her snapped. "Excuse me, miss." Rachel's voice echoed through the lobby. Clara turned, surprised. "Yes?" she said with a smirk. Rachel walked up to her, eyes blazing. "Why did you have to treat him like that? He wasn't bothering anybody." Clara blinked, then laughed. "Excuse me." "You insulted him, humiliated him, in front of everyone and set him away in this heavy rain. He's a beggar, blind and useless," Clara said flatly. "He doesn't belong here." Rachel stepped closer. "He's a human being." Clara's smile faded. Her eyes narrowed. "And you? A cleaner? Think you can talk to me like that? You think you can lecture me?" Rachel didn't flinch. Respect doesn't come with job titles. Being nice is only human. For a second, there was silence. Clara looked Rachel up and down like she was a cockroach that had crawled into her expensive shoes. Then she said coldly, "You've just made a big mistake." Rachel held her gaze. "Maybe. But I'd rather make a mistake for standing up for someone than stay silent and be like you." Clara's jaw clenched. She looked down at her watch, then took a deep breath and smiled stiffly. "Your shift is over, isn't it?" Rachel nodded. "Good," Clara said. "Run along then. Take your stray puppy with you." Rachel ignored her and turned back to Derek. "Come," she said gently, placing her hand on his arm again. "Let's get out of here." Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Rachel held her thin scarf over Derek's head as they walked quietly down the road. "Do you have anywhere to go?" she asked softly. Derek hesitated. "Not really," he said. "I sleep in unfinished buildings. Wherever it is dry." Rachel's stomach tightened. She looked at him again. Soaked shirt, torn shoes, that calm face with those dark glasses hiding his eyes. He looked helpless, yet calm. She frowned, thinking, bringing a stranger home? Was that wise? But then she looked at him again and sighed. "He's blind," she whispered to herself. "He looks harmless." And something about him told her he wasn't like others, and he wasn't just homeless and helpless. He was blind too. She made up her mind. "All right," she said quietly. "You can stay with me, just for a week, till we figure something out." Derek turned his face toward her voice. "Are you sure?" Rachel gave a small smile. "Let's go." And together, they disappeared into the wet street. Two strangers, both with stories, both carrying more than they showed. Rachel pushed open the creaky door to her one-room apartment and stepped inside, gently guiding Derek behind her. The room was small and quiet. The floor was bare cement, and there was only a thin mattress on one side, a small wooden table with a cracked leg, and a plastic container of water in the corner. A faded curtain fluttered at the window from the soft night breeze. "It's not much," she said softly, "but it's dry, and it's mine." Derek stepped inside slowly, tapping the floor lightly with his stick. "It's peaceful," he replied, a calm tone in his voice. Rachel smiled, then reached into a small cupboard and pulled out a dry towel and an old blanket. She handed them to him. "Here," she said. "You can clean up and rest. I'll make something small for us to eat." "Thank you," Derek said, his voice low. Rachel turned to her little stove and began boiling some rice. She added a bit of seasoning and oil, nothing fancy, but it was warm and enough for two. As it cooked, she glanced at Derek, who now sat on the mattress, drying his hair with the towel. That's when she saw it again. The watch. Even in the low light, it gleamed. It looked far too expensive to be on the wrist of a man with no shoes and no home. The silver band sparkled, and Rachel could just barely see the tiny diamond-like stones around its edges. Her brow furrowed slightly. She walked over with 2 small plates of food and sat beside him. As they ate quietly, her curiosity got the better of her. "That watch," she said carefully, pointing toward his wrist. "It looks fancy." Derek smiled. "Oh?" Rachel chuckled softly. "Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful. Doesn't quite match the rest of you, though." Derek laughed quietly. "I get that a lot," he said. Rachel tilted her head. "So, what's your story?" There was a pause. The laughter on Derek's face faded slowly, and his smile became gentler. "I've had better days," he said simply. Rachel sensed something behind the words, a heaviness. "I didn't mean to pry," she said quickly. "I was just curious." He shook his head. "It's okay. You've done enough already. You didn't ask questions when you found me. You just helped." Rachel gave a small smile. "I guess I just felt like you needed it." Derek turned his head toward her voice. "Not everyone would do what you did today. You didn't just help me, you stood up for me." Rachel looked down at her plate, her fingers playing with the rice. She wanted to ask more, about his past, about the calm way he spoke, the quiet strength in his voice, the composure, but something told her to stop. Maybe he had been through too much already. Maybe the past still hurts. She nodded instead and smiled softly. "Well," she said, "you're safe now." Derek nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, almost like a whisper. "For the first time in a while. I feel like I am." The next morning, Rachel woke up before the sun. She moved quietly around her tiny room, not wanting to disturb Derek, who was still asleep. The night had been peaceful. No heavy rain, no shouting neighbors, just silence and the soft sound of Derek's breathing as he slept on the mattress. Rachel boiled some water and made a small pot of pap. She placed a bowl near Derek, along with a few slices of bread she had bought with the last of her coins. She gently tapped his arm. "I'm going to work," she whispered. "There's food here. Please eat." Derek sat up slowly, nodding. "Thank you, Rachel." She gave a small smile, tied her scarf, and stepped out into the early morning. By the time Rachel arrived at the office, Clara was already there. She stood by the mirror near the lobby, adjusting her flawless makeup and tossing her long hair. When she saw Rachel, her face turned cold. She didn't say a word, just watched. Rachel greeted her, trying to be polite, but Clara said nothing. She simply raised one perfectly drawn brow and turned away sharply. From the corner of the hallway, Jessica, the strict HR officer, shouted, "Rachel, less walking, more working. We don't pay you to stroll." Rachel mumbled, "Sorry," and quickly moved to pick up her mop. She didn't see the glare Clara sent after her. A few hours into the morning shift, a loud voice echoed through the hallway. "Where is it? My bracelet, my gold chain." Clara's voice was sharp, panicked, dramatic. Staff began to gather around her office door as she stormed out, pointing at her handbag. "I left it right here," she cried. "In this bag. It's not here anymore." Jessica frowned. "Are you sure?" "I know what I'm saying," Clara snapped. "It was a gift from my sister in Paris. Someone here must have taken it." There was murmuring in the hallway. Rachel was in the restroom when she bent down to pick up a dirty tissue from the floor and saw something shiny near the bin. She reached for it. A delicate gold chain. Her eyes widened. She stood up quickly, walked out, and headed toward Clara's office. But just before she could say a word,
Clara spotted her holding the chain. "You!" Clara shouted, pointing directly at Rachel. Rachel froze. "You stole it, didn't you?" Clara screamed. "You're poor, desperate. Of course you took it." Rachel's mouth dropped open. "No! I found it in the—" "Don't lie," Clara cut in. "You brought a beggar into this company yesterday. I should have known you'd stoop this low. You want money so badly you've started stealing." "That's not true," Rachel cried, eyes wide. "I found it in the restroom. I was coming to return it." "Lies," Clara hissed. "You petty thief. Who would believe you?" Jessica looked uncomfortable. A few staff tried to speak, but Clara shut them down with one look. She marched to Mr. Thompson's office, dragging Rachel behind her. Minutes later, Rachel stood quietly in front of Mr. Thompson's desk. Clara told her side of the story, twisting the facts like a snake. "She brought a homeless beggar into our company," Clara said, her voice full of fake concern. "And now she's stealing. This is the kind of person you've hired." Rachel tried to explain. "Sir, I didn't steal. Please, let me explain." But Mr. Thompson waved his hand. "Enough. I don't want drama in this company. We gave you a chance, and this is how you repay us?" He pulled a paper from his drawer. "You're dismissed. Leave now." Rachel stared at him, her lips trembling. "Sir, please, leave before I call security. Just 2 days." Rachel had worked only 2 days, and now she was being thrown out like trash. She stepped out of the office, heart pounding, eyes blurry with tears. Clara stood by the door, arms crossed, smiling slightly. "Next time," she whispered coldly. "Know your place." Rachel said nothing, but as she walked away, her heart was heavy. She walked home slowly, her shoulders soaked from light rain and her heart heavier than her steps. She didn't even notice the cold wind brushing against her arms or the way her slippers scraped the rough pavement. When she opened the door to her room, Derek was sitting quietly on the mattress, the folded blanket resting beside him. The moment he heard the door, he sat up. "Rachel, you're back early." She didn't reply at first. She placed her bag down gently, as if even the sound of it falling might break her completely. Derek turned his face toward her. "Is everything all right?" Rachel sat on the edge of the mattress. Her hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the scarf from her head. Then she took a deep breath and said, "I got fired." Derek's brow lifted slightly. "Why?" Rachel shook her head. "Clara accused me of stealing her chain. I found it in the restroom and I was taking it back. But she said I took it." Derek was silent for a moment. "And they believed her?" Rachel gave a weak smile. "Of course they did. I'm just the poor cleaner who brought a beggar to work." She tried to laugh, but her lips quivered instead. She looked down at her hands. "I thought I was okay," she whispered. "I thought I was strong, that I'd just walk away and not care." Her voice cracked. "But I do care." Tears rolled down her cheeks, one after the other. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry. "I was so happy when I got that job," she sobbed. "I told myself it was the beginning, that I would work hard, save money, and maybe go back to school someday." Derek listened quietly, his expression calm, his hands resting on his lap. Rachel wiped her face. "I wanted to study fashion, become a designer, make beautiful things. I used to draw clothes in my old notebooks, sketch dresses when I had free time. I dreamed about opening a small shop someday." Her voice softened to a whisper. "But now, I feel like everything's shattering, one by one. And I'm so tired." The room was silent for a moment. Then Derek spoke, his voice low and steady. "Rachel," he said, "good people always win at last." She sniffed, still staring at the floor. "I know it hurts right now," Derek continued. "But you're not lost. You didn't do anything wrong. You helped a stranger. You stood up for someone. You were honest and brave. That's not failure." He leaned forward slightly. "Everything will fall into place eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day. And when it does, you'll look back at this moment and smile, because it didn't break you." Rachel looked up at him, eyes red but soft. "Do you really believe that?" she asked. "I do,"
Derek said. Because I've lived long enough to see how the world works. Sometimes the ones at the bottom rise the highest, and the ones who think they're on top fall the hardest. A silence settled between them. Then Rachel gave a small, tired smile. Thank you, she said, wiping her eyes. You always know what to say. Derek smiled back. It's because I've been in the dark long enough to recognize the light when I see it. The next morning, Rachel woke up feeling a little lighter. Her chest still carried pain, but after pouring her heart out to Derek the night before, something in her spirit had settled. She wasn't healed, but she wasn't breaking anymore. She got up early, swept the front of her little home, and boiled water for tea. Derek sat on the mattress, listening to the soft clinking of metal pots and the sound of her humming, a slow, hopeful tune. Feeling better? He asked, tilting his head. Rachel smiled faintly. A bit. I guess talking helped. But things were far from easy. That evening, after returning from job hunting in town, Rachel lit a small fire just outside her door. She placed a rusted grill on top and began to roast some corn she had bought from a nearby farm stand. She didn't have much, but roasting corn in the evenings might earn her a little money. If she sold 10, maybe she could eat. If she sold 20, maybe she could save. During the day, she roamed the streets, going from shop to shop, office to office, asking if they needed any help. Most said no. A few said maybe. But no one gave her a job. Let me come with you, Derek offered one afternoon. I could maybe help somehow. Rachel turned to him quickly. No, Derek. You need to rest. But you're blind, she said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. I can't risk you getting hurt out there. Derek sighed but didn't argue further. And so Rachel worked. Hard. Too hard. Every day she walked miles under the sun, knocking on doors. Every night she returned home, lit the fire, and roasted corn with tired hands and aching feet. She barely ate. She barely slept. And she never complained. But her body began to give up. One evening, while placing corn on the fire, Rachel felt dizzy. The world spun, her knees buckled, and the last thing she heard was Derek's voice calling her name before everything went dark. When she opened her eyes again, the world was white. Soft pillows, a clean bedsheet, and the hum of a ceiling fan greeted her. She blinked. Was she in a hospital? She tried to sit up but winced. Her head hurt. Her arms felt weak. A nurse entered the room with a gentle smile. You're awake. That's good. Rachel licked her dry lips. Where am I? You're in St. Hope's private hospital, the nurse replied, adjusting her IV line. You had severe malaria and collapsed from exhaustion, but you're safe now. Rachel's brow furrowed. How did I get here? The man who brought you didn't say much, just asked that we treat you well. He left shortly after. Rachel's heart skipped. Derek? The nurse shrugged. He didn't leave a name. Rachel looked around. On the side table was a tiny key holder, a little fabric charm shaped like a sun. It wasn't hers. Her chest tightened. Your bill, the nurse added gently, was fully paid for, anonymously. Rachel stared at her. Paid, she repeated. All of it? The nurse nodded. Every single penny. Later that evening, when she was discharged, Rachel stood outside the hospital door holding the tiny key holder, her heart heavy and grateful all at once. She scanned the street. No sign of Derek. Her eyes searched the corners, the alleys, but he was nowhere in sight. She held the key holder to her chest. He's blind, she whispered to herself. Where could he have gone? She didn't know, but deep inside she prayed, please let him be safe. While Rachel was being discharged from the hospital and wondering where Derek had gone, he was already miles away, back home. Not just any home, a mansion. Tall white gates opened slowly as a black car pulled into a long driveway lined with trimmed hedges and flowering trees. Inside the mansion, marble floors gleamed and chandeliers sparkled. Derek stepped out of the car and removed his dark glasses. There was nothing wrong with his eyes. He looked around at the familiar walls, the grand staircase, the quiet staff bowing slightly as he passed. He nodded gently at them, still deep in thought. Derek Williams, founder and CEO of Williams Group. Young, brilliant, and mysterious, he had built his empire from scratch. Years of sweat, sacrifice, and silent nights working alone had brought him success. Abroad, people admired his intelligence and leadership, but in his heart, Derek had never forgotten the value of one thing: kindness. That was why, when he returned to the country a few weeks earlier, he didn't walk into his office wearing a suit, demanding attention. Instead, he had chosen a different path. He had dressed in plain clothes, removed his shoes, and walked to the very front of his own company, the place he had built from the ground up, and sat there, like someone in need. No one recognized him. No one stopped. Some people laughed. Others looked away. Some whispered insults as they passed. Clara, loud and proud, had looked him up and down like he was trash. She didn't know he owned the very floor she walked on with such pride. Then came Rachel. Tired, underpaid, and barely surviving, but with a heart full of compassion. She gave him her umbrella. She chased a thief for him. She fed him, defended him, welcomed him into her small home without asking anything in return. And she did all this despite having no idea of who he was. And that moved Derek more than words could say. He had stayed longer than he planned, just to be close to her, to see her laugh, hear her speak, feel her warmth. But it hurt him deeply watching her struggle, roasting corn in front of a broken home, walking miles every day just to be rejected again and again, until finally falling ill. When she collapsed, he had panicked. He carried her to the nearest hospital and watched over her until the doctors said she would recover. Then he left. Quietly, he paid every bill, left behind a tiny sun-shaped keyholder, and returned to his mansion. Because now, it was time to fix a few things. He looked out of the tall window in his study. His eyes, clear and full of fire, narrowed slightly. There were people to face, things to set right. But soon, he would see her again, because she had touched something in him that money, power, and fame never could. And he wasn't about to let her go. 2 days passed. Rachel sat quietly on her mattress, staring at the little sun-shaped keyholder lying on her table. She had barely touched her food, barely slept. Every evening she looked out through her small window, hoping to see a familiar figure tapping his way gently down the road with a walking stick. But Derek never came. He didn't leave a note, didn't send a message. Rachel sighed deeply and ran a hand over her tired face. There was no way to call him, no way to ask where he was, or if he was okay. She sat there in silence, her heart tight in her chest. Then it hit her. 7 days. It had been exactly 7 days since she brought Derek home. And she had told him that first night, just for the night, maybe a week. Maybe he had taken her words seriously. Maybe he had left because he thought his time was up. But still, he could have said goodbye. Rachel blinked back tears. Maybe it's for the best, she whispered to herself, forcing a smile. He probably has somewhere better to be. But even as she said the words, her heart ached. Meanwhile, back at the Williams Group main building, the atmosphere was different, tense, quiet. The staff, usually buzzing with excitement, were frozen in place, eyes wide, jaws dropped. The glass doors of the elevator had just opened. Out stepped a tall man in a sharp suit, walking with calm power and quiet confidence. No stick, no ragged clothes, no dark glasses. Just clear, piercing gaze that swept across the office floor. It was Derek Williams, the CEO, the same CEO they had all been waiting eagerly to impress. Clara was the first to react. She stood up so fast her chair nearly toppled over, and she recognized him immediately, the blind man she had humiliated and thrown out. "Sir, I didn't know you were coming in today," she stammered, trying to smooth her hair and force a smile and praying he had somehow miraculously forgotten that incident. Derek didn't smile. He walked slowly to the center of the office, facing everyone. "I've been back for days," he said calmly, "but I wanted to see something." He paused, then continued. "I sat outside this building, watched my staff walk past me. Some looked away, some laughed, Some even insulted me. And one, his eyes moved to Clara. You threw me out of my own company. A wave of whispers passed through the crowd. Clara's face turned pale. Sir, please. Derek raised his hand. Don't interrupt me. She froze. He continued. Only one person showed kindness. A girl who had nothing yet gave everything she had, her umbrella, her time, her dignity. And what did this company do in return? It fired her. He pulled a remote from his pocket and clicked it. A large screen flickered to life behind him, showing CCTV footage, Clara holding her bag, placing it down, then faking panic. Her expressions, her timing, her fake tears, all clearly acted. We don't have cameras inside the restroom, Derek said, but the footage before and after is enough to show your true intentions. Clara's hands trembled. Sir, I can explain. There's nothing to explain, Derek said coldly. You accused an innocent girl. You mocked a man you thought was beneath you, and you almost destroyed someone's dream, just to protect your pride. He turned to the others. Let this be a warning to all of you. This company was built on honesty, kindness, and hard work, not cruelty, not ego, and certainly not lies. He looked back at Clara. You're dismissed, immediately. No salary, no letter of recommendation. You will not represent this company another second. Clara gasped. No, please, sir. I didn't know. I thought... You thought I was blind and homeless, filthy, useless, less than a human. Well, you thought wrong, Derek cut in, his voice sharp. Let her be an example, he told the office. We rise by lifting others. Anyone who forgets that doesn't belong here. You are not better than others because you are fortunate. Clara picked up her things with shaking hands and walked out slowly, her heels no longer proud. Her head bowed, her dreams crumbled. The office stayed quiet for a long time. They had all seen something real that day. Justice. Later that evening, the evening sun poured gently through Rachel's tiny window as she sat sewing a torn blouse she had planned to resell at the market. Her thoughts once again drifted to Derek. It had been days since she last saw him, and though she kept telling herself to move on, her heart hadn't quite caught up. Just then, a knock sounded on her door. She rose slowly and opened it. A young delivery boy stood there holding a brown envelope. For Miss Rachel, he said politely. Rachel blinked in surprise. From who? He shrugged. There's a note inside. She thanked him and closed the door. Inside the envelope was a small slip of paper. The message read, Rachel, please come to this address at 5 p.m. today. I owe you more than I can ever say. Derek. Rachel's heart skipped. She stared at the note for a long moment. Her hands trembled slightly. At 4:55 p.m., Rachel stood in front of a tall, black iron gate. Beyond it was a mansion so beautiful, it looked like something from a movie. The building stretched wide with shining glass windows, white walls, and flower gardens trimmed with perfection. Water fountains danced in the middle of the compound. She clutched her handbag tightly, unsure if she should walk in. But just then, the gate opened gently, as if someone had been watching her all along. Please come in, Miss Rachel, a calm voice said. A butler led her through the wide driveway into the mansion's entrance. The foyer was bright and sunlit, with golden chandeliers hanging like floating stars. The floors were smooth marble, and the scent of fresh roses filled the air. And there, standing in the middle of the foyer, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, was Derek. No stick, just Derek. Straight, tall, handsome, and confident. He stepped forward with a soft smile and removed his glasses slowly in the sunlight, revealing clear, strong eyes. I'm not blind, Rachel, he said gently. I never was. Rachel froze. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. He took another step closer. My full name is Derek Williams. I'm the CEO of Williams Group. The building where you worked is mine. Rachel stared at him, stunned. Her eyes scanned the mansion, the suit, the way he now carried himself. Everything made sense now. The expensive watch, the calm voice, the quiet confidence. You, she whispered. You're the CEO? He nodded. Yes. Rachel's heart pounded.
She didn't know whether to be angry, confused, or speechless. So she stood there, in the middle of a glowing mansion, face to face with a man she thought was lost, poor, and blind, now revealed as a billionaire she could barely understand. And all she could say was, "Why?" Derek stepped forward gently. He could see the storm of emotion in her eyes, and his voice was soft, steady, and sincere. "I know this is a lot to take in," he began, "and I owe you an explanation." Rachel didn't say a word. She simply nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Derek took a deep breath. "When I returned to the country, I didn't want to just walk into my company like a king. I wanted to know what kind of people were working for me. Not how they treated me in a boardroom, but how they treated strangers, the helpless, the poor. I built my company from scratch, so I value integrity." He looked directly into her eyes.
So I stood in front of my own building, looking like someone who had nothing. He paused, then smiled gently. Everyone walked past me. Some mocked me. Miss Clara even threw me out. Others laughed. But then, there was you. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. You didn't know who I was. You had nothing yourself. But you gave me your umbrella. You chased a thief for me. You gave me food, shelter, and most of all, you gave me dignity. Derek stepped even closer. I never forgot that. And when you fell sick, I stayed until I knew you'd be okay. I left the little sun key holder, because I knew we'd meet again.
I never doubted it, not for a second. Rachel wiped her eyes silently. "I'm so sorry for hiding the truth," he said softly. "I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I needed to see your heart. And Rachel, your heart is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Her breath caught. "Which is why," Derek continued, "I want to offer you two things." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a formal-looking envelope. "First, a job, a real one, not as a cleaner, not as a temp, but as my executive personal assistant." Rachel gasped. "You'll work with me directly, good salary, real respect, no more mops and buckets." Her hands flew to her mouth. "And second," Derek said, reaching for another small envelope, "I want to sponsor your education." Rachel froze. "I'll pay for you to attend the best fashion school in the country, and if you want, even abroad. You told me once that you dream of becoming a designer. Let's make that dream real." Tears rolled freely down Rachel's cheeks now. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. I never asked for anything." "I know," Derek said, his voice low. "That's what makes you different. You never asked, but you gave. And now, it's your turn to receive." Rachel stepped forward slowly. "I don't know why you chose me," she said, voice shaking. "But thank you. Thank you, Derek, with all my heart." He smiled. "I should be the one thanking you." In that quiet moment, beneath the soft glow of chandeliers and the peace of truth finally revealed, something unspoken passed between them. Something warm. Something real. Weeks passed. Rachel now walked through the Williams Group building, not with a mop in hand, but with quiet confidence and poise. Her ID badge read, Executive Personal Assistant, and her work desk sat just outside the CEO's office. Everywhere she went, people greeted her with respect. She was still the same Rachel, humble, kind, always smiling, but now she was finally walking in a world that saw her worth. And beside her, always close, was Derek. They worked together daily. He trusted her with schedules, plans, even major decisions. But beyond work, something much deeper had begun to bloom. Derek found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, admiring the way she treated everyone with gentle dignity, how she listened, how she carried her past without shame, but also without bitterness. She didn't need diamonds to shine. She glowed from within. And Derek? He had fallen completely in love. Not just with her kindness, but with her strength, her laughter, her dreams. One quiet evening, he invited her to dinner. Not just any dinner, but a private table set on the rooftop of a luxurious cafe, overlooking the glowing city skyline. Candles flickered in soft holders. A small violinist played in the distance. Rachel arrived in a simple, beautiful dress, one she had designed and sewn herself. "You look,"
Breathtaking, Derek said as he stood up to pull out her chair. She blushed and smiled shyly. You look good too, Mr. CEO. They both laughed. As the meal ended, Derek rose from his seat and walked to her side. Rachel looked up, confused, until she saw him kneel down on one knee. Her breath caught. Derek took a tiny velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a shining diamond ring. But it was his words that made her eyes well with tears. You gave me a home when no one else would, he said gently. You fed me when you didn't have to. You shielded me from the rain when no one else even stopped to look. Rachel, will you let me give you the world? Tears slipped down Rachel's cheeks as she nodded, smiling through them. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Derek, with all my heart. The wedding was a dream. Held in a grand garden with twinkling lights and petals falling like snow, the ceremony was full of joy and celebration. Guests dressed in elegance, music filled the air, and love danced in every corner. Rachel walked down the aisle in a stunning white dress, one she had designed herself. At the very back, dressed in plain clothes and wearing dark glasses, sat Clara. She said nothing. She watched in silence as the girl she once mocked, insulted, and fired became the bride of the man she had desperately tried to impress. The CEO's bride. Not because of beauty, not because of wealth, but because of a heart that chose kindness every single time. Rachel's voice echoed softly, full of peace and quiet wisdom. You never know who you're helping. Kindness has no uniform. Just do good and leave the rest to God.